7 in the evening in late August. The light has gone the color of weak tea. Somebody is standing at the edge of a garden with a hose running in one hand, looking at tomato plants that have started to sprawl sideways, and thinking, without quite putting it into words, that the season is basically over now, that the work is done, that what is left is watching. That evening is the most expensive evening of the gardening year, not because anything goes wrong in it, because of the 10 things that could be done in it and are not, and cannot be done again until next year comes back around. By the time this ends, you will know all 10, and you will know which one of them costs nothing, takes about 10 minutes, and is the single thing that separates people whose gardens get better every year from people who garden for 20 years and stay exactly where they started. It is not the one you are expecting. It is not even a task. Here is the thing about August that almost nobody says out loud. August feels like an ending. Everything is heavy and full and slightly tired. The beds are at their most abundant and their most untidy at the same time. The heat makes standing outside for an hour feel like an achievement. And so August gets treated as the long exhale after the effort of spring. But August is not the exhale. August is the hinge. Almost everything that determines what the garden looks like next April is decided in the 4 or 5 weeks you are currently thinking of as the wind down. The soil is still warm. The light is still long. Roots are still moving. Cuttings still take. Seed is ripe and has not scattered yet. There is a whole second season sitting inside August, and it is invisible because it does not announce itself the way spring does. Spring shouts, August whispers, so people miss it. And then September arrives, and the ground has cooled, and the light has shortened, and every single one of those 10 things has quietly become impossible, or possible but much harder, or possible but a year later than it needed to be. There is one more thing I want you to hold on to as we go, because it runs underneath all 10 of these. Somewhere on this list is something your grandmother did every August without ever thinking of it as a job. She would not have called it gardening. She would have called it something so ordinary it barely had a name. It cost her nothing. It took about the length of a cup of tea. And it is the reason her garden looked the way it did, and the reason almost nobody's garden looks that way now. I will tell you which one it is, not yet. We are going to walk through all 10 in the order that August actually asks for them, starting with the one that has the hardest deadline of the whole list. There is a window open right now, and it does not stay open long, and almost everyone spends it looking at tomatoes. The first thing is a sowing, and this is the part that surprises people who have gardened for years without ever quite believing it. You can sow now, right now, in August, and a great deal of what you sow in the next 3 or 4 weeks will be food on a plate in October, November, and in some places straight through to February. Spinach, lettuce, rocket and other salad leaves, turnips, radishes, chard, kale, spring cabbage, pak choi, coriander and dill and parsley. Winter hardy varieties of onion and broad bean toward the end of the window. Fast-growing beetroot if you are somewhere mild. Here is why this works, and the reason is worth understanding rather than just accepting, because once you understand it, you will never mistime it again. A seed needs 2 things to get going: warm soil and light. In April, you have increasing light and cold soil, which is why April sowings sit there sulking for 2 weeks before anything happens. In August, you have the reverse. The soil is at its warmest point of the entire year, warmer in August than in June because soil lags behind air by about 6 weeks. And the light, while shortening, is still long and still strong. So in August, sowing germinates fast, faster than the same seed sown in spring. Things come up in 4 days that took 12 in April. That warm soil is a free head start, and it is available for about a month, and then it goes. What people do instead is look at the calendar, see the 8th month, decide that sowing is a spring activity, and let the warmest soil of the year sit empty under a row of finished pea plants. Now the honest complication, because I am not going to pretend this is effortless. The plants you sow now grow through shortening days. That means they grow more slowly as they get bigger, the opposite of a spring sowing. So the trick is to get them to a decent size while the light is still generous, and then let them sit through the cold rather than expecting them to bulk up in December. Which is exactly why the deadline matters so much. A spinach seed sown on the 20th of August and a spinach seed sown on the 20th of September are not 2 weeks apart. They are a season apart. The first one gets 4 good weeks of strong light to build itself. The second one gets almost none and spends the winter as a seedling that never quite became anything. 4 weeks of calendar, an entire winter of difference. And here is the part that catches people who are used to spring gardening. In August, you are sowing into ground that is occupied. The peas are finished but still standing. The early potatoes are out but the bed has not been tidied. The garlic space has been empty since July and has quietly grown a crop of weeds. So this task is really two tasks welded together. Clear something and immediately sow into it. Not clear it this week and sow next week. The same afternoon or as close to it as you can manage, because every day that bed sits empty is a day of the warmest soil of the year going to waste. Ask yourself something. When did you last eat something from your own garden in November? For most people, the honest answer is never. Not because November is impossible, because the sowing that would have made it happen was due in August, and August did not feel like sowing season. There is a particular image that stays with me about this. An allotment in the north of England, a plot near the gate, and an old man who grew almost nothing spectacular. No prize marrows, no competition leaks, nothing anybody stopped to photograph. What he had instead was that, in the second week of January, when every other plot on the site was bare mud and abandoned netting, his had 4 rows of something green standing in it. Kale, leeks, and 2 rows of chard that had gone through frost and come out the other side looking almost smug. People used to ask him what his secret was, expecting a variety name or some trick with fleece. He would say, every time, that he had done it in August. That was the whole answer, and nobody ever found it satisfying, because it is not really an answer about January at all. It is an answer about a specific Tuesday 5 months earlier when he cleared a bed of finished peas and did not stop for a cup of tea first. That is what the warm soil buys, not a better plant, a different month. And there is something about eating from your own ground in the middle of winter that is out of proportion to the food itself. It is not about the spinach. It is about the fact that the growing did not stop when the weather did. Which brings us straight to the second thing, and this one is not about adding anything at all. It is about the thing you are almost certainly doing every single evening right now, and doing in a way that is quietly making your plants weaker. Go back to that person standing with the hose at 7 in the evening. That is most of us in August. It is the most common gardening act of the entire month, and it is very often the least useful one. Here is the problem, and it is a problem of instinct rather than ignorance. Hot weather makes you want to water often. It feels responsible. The soil surface is dry and pale by midday. The leaves look tired by 4 o'clock, and so you go out every evening and give everything a decent drink. 10 minutes, maybe 15, moving the hose along the row. The surface darkens. The leaves perk up. It looks and feels like care. But consider what actually happened underground. A light daily watering wets the top few centimeters of soil and no further. It never reaches down. And a plant is a fundamentally lazy organism in the best possible sense. It puts roots where the water is. If the water is always in the top few centimeters, the roots stay in the top few centimeters because there is no reason to go looking further. So you have trained the plant. You have taught it, one evening at a time, that water lives near the surface. And that top layer is the layer that dries fastest, heats most, and disappears first the moment you go away for a weekend or forget for 3 days. You have made the plant dependent on you. The alternative sounds almost careless the first time you hear it. Water less often and vastly more deeply. Not 15 minutes every evening. A long, slow soak, properly long, once or twice a week, in the same time that you would have spread across 7 days. Now the water reaches down, and the roots follow it down because that is where the water is. And a plant with deep roots is a plant that can survive a hot week without you, that stands up in wind, that does not collapse the day you leave for a wedding. There is a number worth carrying around for this. A rough rule that experienced growers use is that most vegetable beds want somewhere around 2 or 3 centimeters of water a week in hot weather, delivered in 1 or 2 sessions rather than 7. If you want to know what you are actually delivering, put an empty tin can in the bed while you water and see how long the hose takes to fill it a couple of centimeters deep. Almost everyone is shocked. It takes much longer than they thought. That is the paradox at the middle of August watering. The more attentive you are, in the obvious way, the more fragile you make the plant. The apparent neglect of a long weekly soak builds something the daily kindness never can. And it goes further than watering. This is the point in the year where a great deal of what people do out of care is actually doing harm, because the instinct in heat is to fuss, to water daily, to feed everything weekly, to pick off every yellowing leaf, to keep the soil bare and tidy so it looks cared for. Bare, tidy soil in August is soil that is cooking. It loses water to evaporation all day, and it bakes to a crust that then sheds the next rain instead of absorbing it. Covered soil, under mulch or under the shade of the plants themselves, holds moisture and stays cool. We will come back to that properly, because covering the soil is one of the 10, and it deserves its own space. Feel where this is going. Several of these 10 things are not additions to your workload at all. 2 of them are subtractions. What August actually asks for is not more effort, it is differently placed effort. And the next one is the clearest example on the list. Because right now, standing in your garden, there is an entire second garden waiting on the plants you already own, and it is free, and the window for taking it is open for about 6 weeks. Walk over to a shrub. Lavender, rosemary, sage, hydrangea, fuchsia, penstemon, box, currant bush, thyme, whatever you have. Take hold of a shoot from this year's growth. Not the soft, floppy tip that bends without resistance, and not the hard, woody stem from previous years. The bit in between, the shoot that has firmed up at the base but is still green and flexible at the top. It snaps with a slight click if you bend it hard. That shoot is a whole plant. It just does not know it yet. This is what gardeners call taking semi-ripe cuttings, and August is very close to the perfect month for it across a huge range of plants. And it is, without exaggeration, the highest value hour available in the entire gardening year. Here is the arithmetic that nobody does out loud. A decent lavender plant in a garden center costs somewhere between 8 and 15 pounds or dollars, depending on where you are and how big it is. An hour in August with a pair of secateurs and a bag of gritty compost turns one lavender plant into 20. If even half of them take, and with lavender considerably more than half usually do, you have produced several £100 worth of plants from an afternoon and about 2 pounds of compost. Now do that with the hedge you have been meaning to plant and pricing up nervously for 3 years. The method is genuinely simple, and I am going to give it to you plainly because the mystique around propagation is the main thing stopping people from trying it. Cut a shoot about 10 centimeters long just below a leaf joint. Strip the leaves from the bottom half. If the remaining leaves are large, cut them in half across, which reduces water loss while the cutting has no roots to replenish itself. Push it into a pot of gritty, free-draining compost, several cuttings around the edge of one pot, water once, and put it somewhere bright but out of direct blazing sun. A shaded windowsill, the north side of a wall, a cold frame with the lid propped. Then leave it alone. That is the hardest part. 6 to 10 weeks. Do not pull them up to check. Why August works so specifically is the same reason the sowing works. Warm soil, decent light, and a shoot that has stored a summer's worth of sugars but has not yet gone hard and woody. Take the same cutting in June and it is too soft and it rots. Take it in October and it is too woody and it sits there all winter doing nothing. The plant has to be in exactly this state, and it is in exactly this state right now. Here is what I find genuinely moving about this one, and I do not think it is sentimental to say it. A cutting is not a copy in the way a photograph is a copy. It is the same plant, genetically identical, continuous tissue, the same individual growing in a second place. When you take 20 cuttings from a rosemary bush and give them to 20 people, you have not made 20 rosemary bushes. You have put one rosemary bush in 20 gardens. People do this without knowing what they are doing. Someone takes a cutting from their mother's garden after she dies and grows it on a windowsill, and they think of it as a memento. It is not a memento. It is the plant. The actual plant still growing in a new house 30 years later. There is a rosemary bush somewhere in England that gardeners have been passing along as cuttings since the 1700s. Not descendants, the same one. And nearly every hedge, every border, every plant you have looked at in someone's garden and quietly wanted is available to you for the price of asking in August for about 6 weeks. And there is a quieter effect that nobody mentions when they teach propagation, which is what it does to how you look at other people's gardens. Before you can take cuttings, a beautiful garden is something to admire and slightly resent. It belongs to somebody with better soil, more time, or more money. Afterwards, it becomes something else entirely. You walk past a front garden with a rosemary hedge and you are not envious anymore. You are calculating. 6 weeks, a bag of grit, one conversation with whoever lives there. Almost nobody says no, incidentally. That is worth knowing. Ask a stranger for a shoot off their lavender, and you will get a shoot off their lavender, usually along with advice you did not ask for, and quite often a second cutting from something else they think you should have. There is no gardener alive who does not secretly want their plants in more places, which is a good place to admit the obvious. There is something else you can take from a plant in August that is even cheaper, even faster, and even more overlooked. And this is the one your grandmother did. She saved seed. That is the thing. That is the ordinary act with barely a name that she did every August, standing at a kitchen table with a chipped bowl and a paper envelope, and that almost nobody does now. She let a few plants go over, not all of them. A few. The best lettuce, the bean pods she deliberately did not pick, the fattest pea pods on the strongest plant, a tomato from the earliest and most reliable vine. She let them dry and go slightly ugly, which is exactly what a garden trained on tidiness will not allow, and then she opened them at the kitchen table and put what was inside into an envelope and wrote on it in pencil. And that envelope was next year's garden, for nothing. Let me make the case for this properly, because the money is genuinely the least interesting part of it. Yes, a packet of seed costs a couple of pounds and one bean plant gives you enough seed for 4 years. And yes, if you did this across a whole vegetable garden, your annual seed spend would go to roughly nothing. That is true, and it is not the point. The point is that saved seed is not the same seed you bought. It is better in a way that compounds. Every plant in your garden this year is slightly different from every other. One tomato ripened 11 days earlier than the rest. One bean plant kept producing through the dry fortnight in July when the others sulked. One lettuce did not bolt when the heat came. Those differences are real, and some of them are heritable. If you save seed from the best plant and do it again the next year, and again the year after, you are not simply keeping the variety going. You are slowly bending it toward your garden. Your soil, your rainfall, your particular late frost, your slugs, your wind. 10 years of that and you have something that does not exist anywhere else, a strain adapted to a piece of ground the size of a room. This is how every vegetable variety that has ever existed came to exist, not in a laboratory, in gardens, from people choosing the best plant and keeping its seed over and over for thousands of years. Every single thing you have ever eaten was bred by someone's grandmother doing exactly this. Now the honest limits, because seed saving is often taught badly, and people are put off by being told it is either trivial or impossible. Some things are easy and reliable. Beans, peas, tomatoes, lettuce, and peppers pollinate themselves, so seed saved from them comes back mostly true to the parent. Start with those. A bean is the easiest seed on earth to save. Leave some pods until they rattle, open them, done. Some things are harder. Squash, pumpkins, courgettes, and cucumbers cross wildly with anything nearby, so you may get a surprise. That surprise is sometimes delicious and sometimes inedible. Carrots, beetroot, onions, and cabbages take 2 years to set seed at all. And one genuine caution. If your plants came from seed labeled F1, the seed you save will not come true. It will split into a jumble of the grandparents. Look for the words open pollinated or heirloom if you want to save reliably. Start with beans and tomatoes and lettuce. That is enough for anyone's first year. But here is what I actually want to leave you with about this one. The reason it disappeared is not that seed got cheap. Seed was always cheap. The reason it disappeared is that saving it requires you to let something in your garden go over, look untidy, dry out, and die in place in August in full view. We have become very good at pulling things out the moment they stop looking good. And a garden that is always tidy is a garden that can never give you anything for free. Which is exactly the tension in the next thing, because this one asks you to do the opposite, to cut hard right now when everything still looks alive. There is a particular kind of courage involved in cutting something back in August, and I want to name it, because it is the reason this one gets postponed more than almost anything else on the list. Everything is still green. Everything is still, technically, flowering. There are 3 sad blooms left on the geranium and 11 on the catmint, and the lavender has gone mostly to brown, but there is color in there if you look sideways. Cutting that back feels like ending summer early with your own hands. So people wait. They wait until it is definitively over, which in practice means late September or October, and by then cutting back achieves nothing except tidiness. Here is the mechanism, and once you see it, you will cut without hesitation. A plant's entire purpose is seed. Flowers are not decoration, they are a means. Once a plant has set seed, it has done what it came to do and it stops. It has no reason to make more flowers. It goes quiet and starts moving its resources into roots and storage for winter. Cut the flowering stems off before the seed is finished, while there is still warmth and light and root activity, and you have interrupted that. The plant reads it as failure. It has not reproduced. It has weeks of decent weather remaining. So it tries again and you get a second flush. Catmint, hardy geraniums, lady's mantle, delphiniums, salvias, penstemons. Cut them back hard, by roughly a third to a half, water them, give them a light feed, and many of them will flower again in 4 to 6 weeks. September and October flowers from a 15-minute job in August. Roses are the classic case. Keep deadheading through August and a repeat flowering rose will keep going until the first real frost. Stop deadheading and it sets hips and shuts down within a fortnight. The same plant, 2 entirely different autumns, decided by whether somebody walked round it once a week with secateurs. Herbs work the same way and even more usefully. Basil, mint, oregano, and marjoram all sprint toward flowering in the August heat, and the moment they flower, the leaves turn bitter and tough. Cut them back hard now, right down, and you get a flush of tender new leaves for autumn. Do not, and you have a woody flowering plant that is finished for the year. Now, the necessary caution, because cutting back is not universally good and August is late enough that timing matters. Do not cut back anything tender or borderline hardy this late. New growth is soft growth, and soft growth going into the first frosts gets killed and the damage runs back down into the plant. Leave the fuchsias, the salvias in cold areas, and anything you are nursing through winter. Do not cut back spring flowering shrubs. Forsythia, lilac, weigela, philadelphus. Those set their flower buds in late summer for next spring. Cut them now and you are cutting off next April's flowers with your own hands. That single mistake is behind an enormous share of the disappointment people feel in spring without ever understanding why. Do not shear lavender into the old wood. Lavender will not regrow from bare brown stems. Cut into this year's soft growth only, leaving a couple of centimeters of green. And leave some seed heads standing. Not everything needs cutting. Teasels, rudbeckia, echinacea, grasses, alliums. Those hold structure through the winter and feed birds through the hardest weeks of the year. And a garden in January that has nothing standing in it is a garden with nothing in it at all. Which raises a question worth sitting with. How much of your gardening is actually for the plants, and how much of it is for how the garden looks to you from the kitchen window? The next 2 things are entirely about the answer to that, because both of them look, to anybody watching, like doing nothing at all. 2 things here, and they belong together because they are the same substance in 2 different stages, and because August is the one month of the year when both are available in enormous quantity for free. The first is compost. August is the single best month to build a compost heap that actually works, and the reason is simple. Right now you have both halves of what a heap needs, at the same time in volume. A heap needs green material which is soft, wet, and nitrogen-rich. Grass clippings, spent pea and bean plants, weeds before they seed, kitchen waste, the trimmings from everything you just cut back. And it needs brown material which is dry, woody, and carbon-rich. Dead stems, cardboard, straw, paper, the previous year's dried growth. In April you have almost no green. In November you have almost nothing but brown. In August you have both in bulk, and it is warm, which is what makes a heap heat up and break down in weeks rather than sit there sulking for 2 years. Build it in layers, roughly equal amounts of green and brown. Water it if it is dry, and cover the top so rain does not leach it out. That is the whole method. What people do instead is throw grass clippings in a bin on their own, which produces a slimy anaerobic mess that smells of ammonia and nobody wants to touch. And then they conclude that composting does not work. It is not that it does not work. It is that a heap needs both halves, and August is when you have both. The second pile is mulch, and this is the one I would put in the top 3 of the entire list if I had to rank them. Mulch means covering bare soil. Compost, leaf mold, bark, straw, well-rotted manure, even a thick layer of cardboard. Several centimeters spread over the surface, not dug in, just laid on top. Look at any piece of ground anywhere in the natural world that has not been managed by a person. Woodland floor, meadow, hedgerow, roadside. There is no bare soil anywhere. It is covered always by living plants or by dead ones. Bare soil is not a natural state. It is something people make, and then have to keep making because nature closes it over immediately, which is what weeds are. Cover the soil in August and 4 things happen at once. Evaporation drops dramatically, so all that deep watering stays where you put it. The soil temperature stabilizes, so roots are not swinging between baking and cooling every 24 hours. Weed seeds cannot germinate in the dark. And through autumn and winter, worms drag the mulch down and turn it into soil structure without you lifting a spade. That last one is the part that changes how you think about a garden. Mulch is not a covering. It is a delivery system. You put it on the top and the soil life takes it down, and in 6 months the ground underneath is darker, softer, and holds water better, and you did not dig anything. And here is the honest, slightly uncomfortable bit. Both of these look from a distance like a garden that is not being tended, a heap of rotting vegetation in a corner, beds covered in a layer of brown material rather than showing clean raked earth. There are people whose gardens are immaculately tidy and whose soil is exhausted, thin and pale, and who buy compost every spring and wonder why nothing thrives. And there are people whose gardens look a bit shaggy in August and whose soil is black and crumbling and full of worms. Tidiness and health are not the same thing. In a garden, they are quite often opposites. Worth asking yourself, honestly, which of those 2 gardens you have been quietly working toward all summer, and which one you would rather be standing in 5 years from now. Which brings us to the last physical job on the list, and it is the one that looks the most like destruction. Go and look at a clump of perennials that has been in the ground for 4 or 5 years. Daylilies, irises, hostas, asters, phlox, hardy geraniums. Look at the middle of it. The middle is dead, or bare, or woody, or thin, with all the vigorous growth pushed out to a ring around the edge. It flowered less this year than it did 3 years ago, and you have probably half noticed that and half blamed the weather. Nothing is wrong with it. That is simply what a perennial does. It grows outward from the center, and the center exhausts the soil beneath it and ages, and eventually the plant becomes a living ring around a dead middle. Left alone, it will keep going, weaker every year for a decade. The fix takes 20 minutes and it feels, the first time you do it, like an act of violence. Dig the whole clump up, all of it. Shake the soil off. Then pull or cut it apart into pieces, each one with roots and growth on it, and throw away the tired old center entirely. Replant the healthy outer pieces, spaced properly, in soil you have refreshed with a bit of compost. Water them in. You have just turned one declining plant into 4 or 5 vigorous ones, for nothing, and next summer every one of them will flower better than the original did this year. Late August into September is a very good window for this, And again, the reason is the same reason that runs through everything on this list. The soil is warm, so roots establish fast, and the air is cooling, so the plant is not simultaneously trying to support a lot of leaf in high heat. Divide in July and it wilts. Divide in November and it sits in cold soil doing nothing until spring. Divide now and it has 6 or 8 weeks of active root growth before the ground cools, and it comes up in April already established. The autumn pairing to this is a job that is barely a job at all, and it is the one people find hardest to justify. Preparing ground for something you have not bought yet. Autumn is the best planting season of the year for trees, shrubs, hedges, and fruit. Everything you plant in October and November roots through a mild, wet winter and meets its first summer already anchored. Everything planted in spring spends its first summer trying to grow roots and leaves simultaneously in rising heat. And that is why spring planted trees need watering all summer, and autumn planted ones mostly do not. But autumn planting only works if the ground is ready, and preparing ground properly is not a same-day job. Clear the area now. Cover it with cardboard and a thick layer of compost or manure and leave it. By the time the bare root plants arrive in November, the weeds underneath are dead, the worms have opened up the soil, and you dig a hole rather than fight a battle. So the task in August is to prepare a space for a tree you have not chosen, for a hedge you have not ordered, for a plan you have not fully made. I know how that sounds. It is the least satisfying instruction on this list. There is no result. You clear a patch of ground and cover it with cardboard and there is nothing to show anyone. But every experienced gardener I have ever met does some version of this constantly, and every beginner finds it almost impossible. That gap between preparing for something and doing something is most of what experience actually is. Which is the perfect place to finally get to the 10th thing. The one I promised at the start. The one that costs nothing, takes 10 minutes, and is not a task at all. Write it down. That is it. That is the 10th thing. Sit down this week with a notebook and a pen and write down what happened in your garden this year. I know exactly how that lands after 9 practical jobs. It sounds like the soft filler item at the end of a list. It is not. It is the one that determines whether the other 9 ever compound. Here is the problem it solves, and it is a problem almost nobody notices they have. A garden runs on a cycle of 12 months, which means that every piece of information you learn is needed exactly 1 year after you learn it, at the precise moment you have forgotten it. You will not remember next March which tomato ripened first. You will not remember which corner flooded in February or which bed got no sun after 4 in the afternoon in July. You will not remember that the beans went in too late, or that the slugs took the first sowing and the second one survived, or that the lavender you thought was dead came back in May and the one you were sure was fine did not. You will remember vaguely that something happened, and vaguely is useless. So most people garden the same year 20 times, not 20 years of gardening. 1 year of gardening repeated with the same 3 mistakes each time, because the correction arrives 12 months after the observation and memory does not stretch that far. The notebook breaks that loop. It is the difference between 20 seasons and 1 skill. It does not need to be elaborate. Nobody is reading it. A cheap exercise book and a pencil kept somewhere near the back door. What went in, roughly when, and what happened. Dates of first and last frost if you know them. What cropped well and what did not. What you ate and when. What you ran out of. What you had far too much of and gave away in bagfuls to people who stopped making eye contact with you. And one more thing that matters more than all the data. Write down what you wished you had done. Because right now, in August, you know exactly which sowing you missed in April. You know you should have staked the dahlias before they flopped. You know the courgettes went in too close together again. In August, all of that is vivid and slightly annoying and completely obvious. In February, it will all be gone, replaced by optimism and a seed catalog. Write the annoyance down while you still feel it. Your February self is a different person with worse judgment and more enthusiasm, and the note you leave now is the only way the person who learned the lesson gets to talk to the person who has to act on it. There is something else that happens with a garden notebook, and it is the reason people who keep one rarely stop. After 3 or 4 years, it stops being a planning tool and becomes something else. You open it looking for a sowing date, and you find a line about how the apple tree flowered the week your father was ill. A note about the summer the well nearly ran dry. A page from the year you moved in, when almost nothing worked and you wrote down the failures in a hand that sounds younger than yours. A garden diary is not really about gardening. It is the most honest record of a life anybody keeps, precisely because nobody is performing in it. Nobody writes a garden notebook for an audience. There is no version of yourself being constructed in it. It is just the plain facts of what you did with your hands, year after year, in one small piece of ground. And that is the thing your grandmother had that we do not, more than the seed envelopes and the compost heap. Not knowledge, continuity. The same ground, watched closely, over a long enough time for the pattern to appear. 10 minutes and a cheap notebook is how you start that. And if you want one specific thing to write on the first page, write the date you are watching this and one sentence about what the garden looks like today. Not a plan, not a list, just what is standing there, what is finished, what is still going, what the light is doing at 7 in the evening. It will feel pointless. It is the least useful line in the whole notebook this week, and it will be the most valuable one in it in 5 years, because a plan tells you what you intended and a description tells you what was actually true. Intentions all sound the same after a while. Descriptions do not. There is a version of this that people arrive at by accident, usually in their 60s, usually after somebody dies. They find a note in a shed, or a date penciled on the inside of a seed tin, or a line in the back of a diary that says nothing more than the apples were early. And the whole texture of a year they never saw comes back in one sentence. Nobody writes that line thinking it will do that. That is exactly why it does. 7 in the evening in late August. The light the color of weak tea. Somebody standing at the edge of a garden with a hose running, looking at the sprawling tomatoes, thinking the season is basically over. Nothing about that evening has changed, except what it now contains. There is a bed of finished peas that could be cleared and sown with spinach in the same hour, into the warmest soil it will see all year. There is a lavender bush holding 20 lavender bushes. There are 3 bean pods that could be left to rattle and become next year's beans, and the year after that. There is a catmint that will flower again in 5 weeks if it is cut back tonight. There is a corner where a heap could start, and a bed that could be covered, and a clump of daylilies quietly hollowing out in the middle, and a patch of grass that could be flattened under cardboard for a tree that has not been chosen yet. And there is a notebook somewhere in the house with nothing in it. None of that is more work than the watering that evening was going to be. Most of it is less. The difference is not effort. The difference is knowing that August is not the end of anything. There is one thing I have not said, and it is the real reason any of this matters after 40. Everything on this list is an act of faith in a version of yourself who has not arrived yet. The cutting is for a hedge 4 years from now. The saved seed is for a garden you have not planted. The prepared ground is for a tree you have not bought, that will be worth looking at in a decade, and worth sitting under in 2. The notebook is a letter to a person you will be in February and again in 10 years. At 25, that kind of thinking is abstract. At 60, it is not abstract at all. And the strange, unexpected thing that people discover, usually around the age when everyone assumes they should be winding down and taking it easy, is that planning for a future you may not fully see does not feel like loss. It feels like the opposite. It is the clearest possible statement that you expect there to be one. That is what August is really asking. Not for 10 jobs, for one decision made quietly with a hose in your hand and the light going. The garden is never asking you to finish. It is asking you to begin again, slightly earlier than you think.